They strike without warning. With the power of a nuclear explosion. Nothing can withstand them. They are one of the world's most terrifying natural phenomena. Earthquakes. In this century, earthquakes have killed over 1.5 million people. September 19th, 1985, skyscrapers tumble to the ground as a massive earthquake hits Mexico City. 10,000 people died. July 1963, the town of Skopje in Yugoslavia is destroyed. The tremors last for a couple of seconds, but there are over 1,000 fatalities. January 17th, 1994, 59 people die as an earthquake destroys Northridge, California. 25,000 people are left homeless. Damage is estimated at $40 billion. Earthquakes can strike anywhere in the world. On land, they destroy whole cities. Beneath the sea, they cause huge tidal waves that can wipe out entire communities. In July 1998, an earthquake caused one of this century's most devastating tidal waves. A small fishing village in Papua New Guinea is swept away, killing over 2,500 people. On average, there are 18 large earthquakes every year. They happen mostly in fault zones along the Pacific Rim, places like California, Japan, and Alaska. But although scientists know where earthquakes are likely to strike, they are unable to predict when they will occur. Along the San Andreas Fault Zone in central California is a place known as Parkfield. It's where scientists think a large earthquake is most likely to happen. As a result, it is the most heavily monitored earthquake zone in the world. Over $2 million have been spent trying to predict when the next tremor will happen. But so far, there is no answer. Earthquakes remain unpredictable, and it's often where they're least expected that they cause the most damage. Places like the town of Newcastle in Australia, an industrial city on the mouth of the Hunter River, home of retired steelworker Norm Duffy and his wife Miriam. On the morning of December 28th, 1989, Norm and Miriam were in their garden, enjoying the last of the Christmas holiday sunshine.
I thought we were going down to the club.
Norm came from England in the late 1940s and settled in Australia.
Put on your dancing shoes, I'll take you down the club, and you can buy me lunch.
That morning, Norm decided to go into town to the Workers' Club to renew his membership. He has a hard time convincing Miriam to come along, but eventually she agrees to go.
I've seen you on the pokies.
It was to prove a fateful moment in Norm Duffy's life. This is a recreation of the events that followed. The Newcastle Workers' Club had expanded in the 50 years since it was built, and now comprised 3 floors, including an auditorium, a bar, several meeting rooms, and an underground parking area. That same morning, Barry Spark, the club's maintenance man, starts the day off as usual with a quick game on the poker machines. It's quiet now, but but a rock concert is scheduled for later that night in the main auditorium. Over 2,000 teenagers are expected to attend.
As you know, we've got that rock concert.
Barry and Doreen Holmes, the club's wages clerk, are bracing themselves for a busy day ahead.
Listen, I'm so busy, I've got to go, but I'll catch up with you
Right,
later.
buddy. I better get down to the workshop.
See you.
The Workers' Club is also a popular meeting place for the town's elderly residents, such as 75-year-old retired train driver Albert Bender, who goes there to play the poker machines and have a quiet drink. Widowed 18 months, Albert has only just started going to the club again. Mother of three, Margaret Turnbull, works in the club's reception area.
All right, you fixed it?
Yeah, oh, well, it'll take half an hour. 23.
Before heading down to his workshop in the basement, Barry Sparks comes by to say hello. Barry had won a free trip at the staff Christmas party.
I want to do some game fishing up there. You know, the big marlin out on those boats.
He's looking forward to his vacation.
Yeah, go on, off you go. Go do some work.
I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Norm and Miriam Duffy arrive at the club at 10 o'clock. Once there, Miriam starts playing the poker machines. Norm gives her some change and goes to the office to deal with his membership.
You promised. You promised. There, that's all me both you.
Hi, Mark.
Doreen Holmes is running late. She needs to go to the bank before helping to organize tonight's rock concert.
Lucky Barry, hey?
No, isn't that great?
Barry goes down to the workshop in the club basement, below the parking garage. Albert Bender is playing his favorite poker machine. Meanwhile, Miriam has a run of luck. His membership renewed, Norm returns to find his wife on a roll. All thoughts of the garden are forgotten.
You're winning.
I'll just play this, all right? You might bring me some luck.
In the next 2 minutes, the lives of everyone in the club would change forever.
Hi, Margaret. Not bad, yourself?
Oh, you're my lucky charm.
Definitely is. Every time I want my copy, it disappears.
The tremors last only a few seconds. Miraculously, Margaret Turnbull survives the quake without injury. Stunned, in a state of shock, she wanders through the piles of rubble and twisted metal. As she surveys the wreckage, she still has no idea what has destroyed the building. All across the city, there are areas of devastation. No one knows what's happened. A gas explosion? A mine shaft collapse? In a place like Newcastle, an earthquake isn't the first thing that springs to mind. The emergency services quickly realize they have a major disaster on their hands. All over town, buildings have fallen into the street. Passers-by dig frantically through the rubble to try to free those trapped underneath. TV reporter Ross Hampton is in Hamilton, a suburb of Newcastle, filming a report on a local bus strike. He soon finds himself covering a very different story. At this stage, nobody realizes what's happened.
Well, this is Beaumont Street, Hamilton, just minutes after the blast or the explosion or the earthquake, and it looks as though bombs have hit all along here. It's like a war scene. People are sitting around just dazed. There has been some loss of life, it appears, and buildings all up and down the street have just collapsed into the roadway.
Passers-by are confused, but word spreads that the Workers' Club has collapsed.
I was in Newcastle Workers' Club, and the whole club just collapsed. Just about, yeah.
You were in the club?
Yeah.
What happened?
It just shook and everything just caved in.
The walls caved in?
Yeah, inside the club. Poker machines going down everywhere.
The force of the earthquake has brought down all 3 floors in the club. The auditorium has crashed right through the building, down into the parking garage, and into Barry's office in the basement. He was killed instantly. The scene is a mess of tangled cars and broken bodies. Albert Bender, who's been so looking forward to his first day out since his wife's death, is semi-conscious. His ankles are trapped under a huge cement slab. Norm Duffy is in a small air pocket, pinned under a poker machine, unable to move. Miriam and 2 other women are close by. They're badly injured. All they can do is wait and hope that help is on the way.
You there, Miriam? You right, love? Miriam.
The rescue services are quickly on the scene. With reports of fractured gas pipelines in the area, they know they must proceed with extreme caution. Their priority is to get to the casualties without putting themselves at risk. This will prove to be a difficult task. One of the first ambulance men to go into the club is Wayne Garner. He's been in the ambulance service for 3 years. This is going to be one of the toughest challenges of his career.
I knew the Works Club quite well, and it was just unrecognisable. The first lot of casualties I came to were trapped deep in the club itself. Most of them were all covered with concrete slabs, steel reinforcing, poker machines. There was just debris everywhere.
The rescue teams go deeper into the club, knowing that the building could collapse on them at any moment. They try to locate the injured, buried under the rubble, obscured by thick clouds of dust, listening for sounds of life as the building groans around them.
You hear me? It's gonna be all right, Mum. Just hang in there. It's gonna be okay.
Wayne picks his way through the rubble. Every step is carefully taken. The debris beneath his feet could be hiding a casualty. Wayne finds Albert Bender. Still semi-conscious, Albert is in shock and his vital signs are weak. Wayne tries to reassure him that everything is going to be okay. But Albert is trapped beneath a huge slab of concrete. It's not going to be easy getting it off. Wayne doesn't know that beneath the slab, Albert is losing massive amounts of blood.
Get you out.
As word spreads through Newcastle that there are people trapped inside the Workers' Club, anxious residents hurry to the scene, desperately hoping friends or relatives are not among the casualties. Wayne and his colleague Terry Westlake realize that there is no way they can lift the concrete slab that's pinning Albert down. They call for heavy lifting gear. As rescue efforts continue above them, Norm Duffy is unaware that help is close. He continues to talk to Miriam and the two other women, trying to keep their spirits up. But Miriam has suffered massive internal injuries. She is barely alive.
Come on, love. You'll be right. Miriam?
As the people of Newcastle realize that they have been hit by an earthquake, they begin to worry about the possibility of an aftershock. An aftershock is a smaller earthquake or series of earthquakes which follow the main tremor. They can happen immediately after or several days later. Despite this, the search for the trapped and wounded continues at the Workers' Club. The rescue teams are in grave danger.
I believe there's a fear there's going to be a second tremor.
Yes, there is a possible. That is possible. We're taking precautions for that.
The decision is made to withdraw the rescue teams from the building. Inside the club, the call comes through to pull out, just as Wayne and Terry are close to freeing Albert. They refuse to leave.
Control, Aftershock. Get your man out of there. Acknowledge, over. Rescue teams, this is police rescue control. We're in serious danger of the whole building coming down. I want your man out of there. Acknowledge this call, over.
We've got to get out of here, Wayne. No, we've got to get him out. Come on, sir. Come on.
When the teams gather outside the building, they notice they're missing two of their men.
Wayne, where are you?
The police are now on the scene, and they order Wayne and Terry out. Wayne argues with them, but the police are adamant. They must get out of the building now.
I'm not leaving.
You've got to leave, Wayne. The whole place is coming down.
Give me a hand.
I want you out, and I want you out now.
Wayne makes one last desperate attempt to free Albert.
Wayne, out now.
The slab won't budge.
Wayne, we've got to get out of here. Albert, listen, I've got to go, but I'll be back, all right? Hang in there, mate. I'll be back. You just hang in there, mate.
They have no choice. They must leave.
I made Albert a promise that I was going to get him out, and I just knew that I sort of wasn't going to be able to fulfill that promise.
Outside, the injured are being treated in a makeshift clinic set up in the middle of the road. Among the rescuers, fatigue and frustration are beginning to take their toll. Tempers run high over the evacuation of the club. The ambulance crews and paramedics are desperate to get back inside to treat the casualties. But the police insist the safety of the emergency teams must come first. They wait. No aftershock. The rescue crews know that every second away from the casualties still in the club means that lives are being lost. After 20 minutes, a decision is taken to go back in. Wayne heads straight to Albert Bender. By the time he reaches him, Albert is dead.
Help! Help!
The rescuers are unaware that Norm and Miriam are still trapped under the rubble. Norm is getting desperate.
We're down here!
He can no longer hear any sounds from Miriam.
They're on their way.
He doesn't want to contemplate what the silence might mean.
We didn't actually know that Norm was where he was. Someone thought they heard something, and then we all yelled out, quiet, quiet, so that we could actually hear what was going on.
Quiet! Quiet! We're down here! Righto. We're here!
The rescuers start digging frantically. 4 hours after the earthquake, the teams finally reach Norm and the 3 women. Paramedic Alan Playford is the first to get to him.
Here we are! Yeah, I can just see you, mate.
And you had to yell down through the cracks between these poker machines and let him know that people were there and we were working toward getting him out.
I told you that they'd get us out. Miriam, the cavalry's arrived.
But it is too late for Miriam. Norm Duffy's first thought is for the safety of the women, but it is immediately clear to Alan Playford that Norm himself is seriously injured.
It wasn't very long before this remarkable individual took over. I mean, he wasn't a young man even then, and I'm sure he was aware that his wife was only perhaps 2 metres from him and that she was dead. And he took that in as he took the hands of these other 2 women that were trapped with him. And the remarkable thing is that he was hopelessly trapped himself. He was brave beyond belief, and despite his plight, and he knew, he'd said to me several times that he thought he was going to die, but he wasn't particularly worried about that. He just wanted to try and reassure these 2 ladies that were in terrible pain near him.
At Norm's insistence, the 2 surviving women are evacuated first. Freeing Norm would not be an easy matter.
Tell him, mate, I'm back again.
His legs might have to be amputated.
We might have to take your legs off him.
That was an option neither of them wanted to accept.
No, I'm keeping my legs.
Okay, it's your call. It's your call.
Norm's determination persuades Alan that they should make one last effort.
Okay, mate.
The strength and resilience which has sustained Norm for over 4 hours is now beginning to fade. He's getting weaker by the minute.
I could tell by his fading blood pressure he was starting to lapse into unconsciousness, and I could tell that he wasn't going to go on that much longer if we didn't get him out.
At last, Norm is freed. He's immediately rushed outside for treatment, but his injuries have taken their toll. Almost immediately, Norm goes into cardiac arrest. Alan Playford believes Norm was suffering from what is known as crush injury syndrome.
The crush syndrome occurs when someone's crushed under great weights. It produces a build-up of toxins in the extremity, and then when the weight's lifted, these toxins are released back toward the heart. And the effect on the heart is that it sends it into cardiac arrest. We've all seen the examples of someone trapped between the bumpers of a train. They're talking to their rescuers and quite lucid and what have you. Only shortly thereafter they're released to suddenly die. And so, whilst it's not seen very often, it does occur, and Norm Duffy exhibited all the signs of crush syndrome that day.
The medical teams work frantically to restart his heart. After 10 long minutes, their efforts are rewarded. Norm's heart starts beating again. He's rushed to an ambulance and taken to the hospital. The rescue effort continues inside the club. It would be another 2 hours before the last remaining casualties were taken from the building. Now it was time for the residents of Newcastle to take stock of what the earthquake had done to their loved ones and their town. 12 people lost their lives that day. Over 100 were injured, and the cost of the damage was put at over $1.5 billion Australian dollars. But it was the personal tragedies that hit hardest of all. Like so many other cities around the world which had been the victims of killer quakes, Newcastle was left with an overwhelming sense of grief and confusion. The reality of living through such a terrible event has left the survivors with vivid memories of that day.
It was just an incredible noise. It was just a roar, an absolute roar. But the shuddering is something that I'll never forget, you know, the feeling under your feet. That was what you could feel, you know, and you could actually feel the floor lift, came in waves under your feet, you know. You half expected to see a truck or a train come through the wall at you. That was what it sounded like. It just got louder and louder, you know, and the vibration got worse. What I'd always thought and what I'd told my children, you know, earthquakes don't happen in Australia.
It's really hard to comprehend that, you know, your city that you live in and you work in all your life, and it basically doesn't change. It's comfortable, it's familiar, and everything makes you feel sort of like, yeah, this is my home. And it's just like if you went home and someone had blown up your house. And you just would stand there in utter disbelief and think, no, I'm in the wrong street, I'm in the wrong country, I'm not, you know, this is not happening.
Alan Playford is still haunted by the scenes he witnessed in the Workers' Club.
It was like a pack of cards that had come in, and the cars were amongst these people, the poker machines had split open, and people were trapped in extraordinary places. The honeycombing and the concrete had come down, and people were actually curled up inside what would have been a metre square of honeycomb and just fitted up neatly into it, and it had ridden down and placed itself over the top of them without a mark on them, some of them. Others were killed outright with pieces of masonry through their heads and parts of their body.
After treatment in hospital to repair his shattered legs, Norm returned home 6 months later to a life without Miriam. A modest man, he became an unwilling national hero. For many, his courage and humor typified the spirit of the people of Newcastle. He still lives in the house he shared with Miriam, where he tends the garden she loves so much. It was where you were in the club that determined your chances of survival. Norm and Miriam were above the columns that collapsed. Barry Spark was killed because his office was in the basement. The entire weight of the club fell on top of him. Margaret walked out of the club unscathed because her office had 2 strong supporting walls and a staircase which prevented the floor from collapsing on top of her. Dr. Michael Carlton was on duty that day and helped treat many of the injured. Considering the amount of damage to buildings, he was surprised there weren't more fatalities.
The human body is fairly resilient to a lot of trauma or falling rubble. It depends basically on the type of impact. In other words, the speed the rubble hits you, the direction, the area of the body that's involved. Some individuals may die from what you call relatively trivial injury. They get hit on the head, as of David and Goliath, with a single rock, as opposed to a complete boulder falling on someone and they survive.
Surviving the original impact did not guarantee you made it out alive. Being trapped under great weight, having a blocked airway, or a fractured spinal cord could all lead to death. What struck rescuers was how individuals like Norm Duffy managed to survive for hours while in a state of extreme trauma.
When the body's exposed to any sort of stressful situation, there's a response called the fight and fright response, which is basically a protective mechanism that involves the release of a number of hormones that the body naturally produces. They include adrenaline and other hormones such as endorphins, and they may attenuate or ease painful situations, particularly when the body is under stress. It's not an unknown situation for some people to actually say that they haven't got a great deal of pain when you'd expect them to have significant pain, particularly with the injuries that have been inflicted on them.
Injuries that lead to severe blood loss can be fatal unless rescue services are able to treat them quickly.
Severe blood loss can occur with any trauma situation. Usually what happens is the heart continues to pump, and obviously it pumps it out under pressure. If you have large arteries and large veins open against continuous pressure, you are going to lose blood. If you're not replacing it, then the patient will exsanguinate or just lose blood and die.
It was exactly this massive blood loss which led to Albert Bender's death.
Basically, Albert extenuated from his ankles, so in hindsight now I would have got a medical team in to actually amputate Albert's lower legs so that we could have got him out, and thus we could have probably, or might have been able to save his life. But at that time we didn't know what the story was. We didn't know how hard he was trapped until later on. But from what I can gather now, there was a big concrete slab about 30 tonne sitting across Albert's ankles.
The Newcastle emergency services were not prepared for an earthquake, but they were fully trained in basic disaster procedures, like triage, a technique where medical workers prioritize casualties by separating the walking wounded from the more seriously injured. But unlike other disaster scenarios, earthquake rescue is always hampered by the constant threat of aftershock. It is impossible to predict when an aftershock will occur. In the case of the Newcastle earthquake, the evacuation of the Workers' Club proved unnecessary. But the following day, the town was hit by a small aftershock. Fortunately, no one was injured. The events in Newcastle made headline news around the world and sent shockwaves through the scientific community. How could a killer earthquake happen in Australia? If it happened there, was anywhere safe? Earthquakes in Australia had never killed before, but the reality is that Australia is prone to severe seismic activity.
Australia is ploughing north at a mammoth rate, about the same rate that your fingernails are growing, something of the order of 7.5 centimetres a year, and of course accumulating a lot of energy, and that energy has to be released in earthquakes. It just shows how dynamic the planet is. I like to think of it as a living creature rather than as just a solid piece of rock that doesn't change.
Newcastle was especially vulnerable because it was built on sandy soil, which liquefied when the tremors started. This greatly increased the impact of seismic waves. A more solid geological formation would have absorbed some of the impact. The epicenter was just a few miles away from the town itself. If Newcastle had examined its past, the city might have been better prepared.
In the Newcastle area, there is historical evidence of earthquakes. 3 earthquakes in the last century, an earthquake in 1925, and obviously the recent one in 1989. But between 1925 and 1989, in the human perspective, is a long time, and these things pass out of the oral history. People forget about them. So it probably did come as a surprise to most people when this happened. But it's unusual that it should happen in the middle of a major urban area and cause so much damage and loss of life.
There was an incredible feeling around town after the earthquake that it shouldn't have happened here. Why did it happen to me? And why was there loss of life?
The residents of Newcastle struggled to understand how an earthquake could happen.
Earthquakes are due to slippage on faults, and faults are fractures in the Earth's crust, and stresses build up before the fault gives out. And when the fault finally gives out and slips, we have an earthquake. Fault rupture is very much like tearing a piece of paper, or pulling a zipper open or closed. One often gets the vision that you're opening the earth. You're not. It's just that the slip is propagating down along the fault. And as the slip propagates along the fault, it releases seismic waves. And that's what creates a long duration of shaking in the case of very large earthquakes. There are thousands of earthquakes every day around the world. Most of these earthquakes are very small. They range from an imperceptible event to very large events.
When an earthquake strikes an urban area, the risk of fatalities is greatly increased because of collapsing buildings, falling debris, gas explosions. But even in the city, there are ways of protecting yourself.
If people feel an earthquake, they should do one of several things depending on where they are. If they're in their home, in bed, let's say, and that's been where most of us have been in the last couple of earthquakes because they've occurred early in the morning, they should stay in bed, put a pillow over their head, get under the covers in case there's some falling glass or plaster. If you are in your car on the road and you feel some very strange shaking that you might think is due to a blowout in your tires, for example, you probably want to treat it as a blowout and pull over to the side of the road and stop your car. You probably don't want to run outside. That's probably not a safe thing to do because often things are falling off of buildings. If you're in an area where there's a lot of brick, the brick will be shattering and falling. So it's best to get down, duck, and cover, as we say in earthquake country.
As far as the residents of Newcastle were concerned, their town wasn't earthquake country. When the quake hit, they had no idea what was happening or knowledge of how to protect themselves.
Between the shake and when things started to come down, I don't think it would have made one scrap of difference had we been fully aware of what earthquake was, where to go, how to be safe, all that type of thing. It just happened too quickly.
In earthquake zones around the world, much effort has gone into designing buildings which are better able to withstand tremors. That day in Newcastle, the Workers' Club suffered worst. Questions were asked as to why it had collapsed, while other buildings had remained intact.
From what I can work out, the sequence of failure was one of the columns towards the rear of the building, which was a heavily loaded column by comparison to the others. Along comes the earthquake, which was an east-west direction, and the building shakes that way. And on that cycle, the columns on this side get an extra load due to the building wanting to move that way. From what I can work out, that would have overstressed the column quite considerably. I believe it then failed catastrophically, in other words, it exploded, if you like. As soon as that went, there was insufficient strength in the next column to support the loading, and it just zipped it all the way along to the front of the building.
The columns in the club were just too weak to withstand the earthquake.
Someone said, look at the Newcastle Workers' Club. So I came back round the corner, and as I came round the corner, I noticed a crack coming from the corner down to the roadway of the club. And by the time I got here, it was like it was like an implosion. The club sort of all started to cave in on itself and come down.
The club reopened 2 years later, built to earthquake zone specifications. That should ensure that a similar disaster does not happen again. The city council now has an emergency plan should another quake hit the town. The people of Newcastle know it's not a question of if, but when. Newcastle is a coastal town, and the earthquake struck inland. But had the quake's epicenter been out at sea, then the town could have faced a very different, and in some ways, a far more horrific problem. When an earthquake happens beneath the sea, the dislocation of the sea floor creates a wave which can move faster than a jet plane. An unusual ripple on the surface may be the only sign of imminent danger, but as the wave approaches land and moves into shallower waters, its energy is concentrated. The wave grows in size. It can hit the shore with an unsurvivable force. These waves are popularly called tidal waves, but their correct name is tsunami.
They can travel at roughly 1,000 kilometres an hour. But as they get into the shallower water, they slow down. And of course, as they slow down, the wave amplitude builds up. And that's when you get a damaging tsunami.
Tsunamis are particularly dangerous because they can wreak havoc hundreds of miles from the site of the earthquake which triggers them. A tsunami caused by a massive earthquake off the coast of Chile killed people over 6,000 miles away on the coast of California. The countries around the Pacific Rim are particularly vulnerable. The islands of Hawaii are in the path of many tsunamis that pass across the ocean. In the U.S. alone, more people have been killed by tsunamis than by earthquakes. Professor Kostas Sinolakis, one of the world's leading experts on tsunamis, is trying to promote awareness of the dangers they pose.
I'm still continuously surprised at the power and force of these waves. When we talk about the water current, the speed of the tsunami, it's coming in that was 30 miles per hour. Some people say, well, 30 miles per hour. Houses are designed to withstand wind speeds of the order of 100 miles per hour. So what is 30 miles per hour? Well, water is about 1,000 times heavier than air. So a 30 mile per hour water current is equivalent to a 30,000 mile per hour wind current. So if you want to get some idea of how it would feel surfing a tsunami, just imagine being in a 30,000 mile per hour wind.
In July 1998, a massive tsunami hit a fishing community on the northern coast of Papua New Guinea. In a few terrifying moments, most of the villages along the coastline were swept away, leaving barely a trace behind. A narrow spit of land by the Sisano Lagoon took the full force of the tsunami's incredible power. It was a densely populated area with over 10,000 inhabitants.
The warning signs that came before the tsunami hit was an earthquake at about 10 to 7 on Friday the 17th of July. It shook the house for maybe, it felt like hours, but I would say it would have been 30 seconds to a minute. And then it ceased, and the tsunami came about 20 minutes later in ITV.
One of John's friends, Godfrey Weriai, saw the tsunami approaching. He is one of the few eyewitnesses to survive a tsunami. Most do not live to tell their tale.
I left the house and I walked down to the beach to swim in the sea. But I didn't realize that it's going to be a wave come. So I enjoy swimming. It builds up like a big brick wall. The height of the wave is about 5 meters. I give them the warning when I ran to the house. I yell and call all the people in the camp I talk to them that you should run some meters out so that you can save your life. There was a big wave coming, going to destroy everything.
Godfrey's family and friends escaped to higher ground in time, but others were not so lucky. Over 2,500 people died that night, drowned, battered by floating debris, or swept away, never to be seen again. TV news crews from Australia were some of the first to witness the horror that the tsunami had left in its wake.
Everything that was along the coastline just wasn't there. There was nothing left. It just looked like a deserted beach. I remember seeing one little child that was probably 2 or 3 years old maximum, just amongst all these people that they were trying to stabilise and that were torn to pieces. I'd never been to anything like it before, but it does open up your eyes to really what nature can do just in the matter of a few minutes.
Professor Sinolakis and his team were on the scene soon after. As well as recording the damage caused by the wave, they tried to educate the survivors on how to save themselves should another tsunami hit the area. If more villagers had headed inland after they felt the tremors, the survival rate would have been far higher.
The Papua New Guinea event was a big surprise for us. This was a fairly small earthquake by seismologic standards, and yet it generated a tsunami which, at the worst hit area, created a flow depth of 15 meters. And the damage it caused was, how else can I say it, unbelievable. Bodies were carried for literally hundreds of meters inland, and most of the dead lost completely, most of their skin. And in fact, they looked like they were burned because of the massive skin loss. There were stories of children and being dangling on trees and human remains scattered. It was really a terrible catastrophe. I think when all is said and done, it may end up being, in terms of the human death toll and the human tragedy, the worst event in the last 50 years, if not this century.
Scientists are constantly trying to predict when a tsunami will strike. As with earthquakes, nobody knows the answer.
We're always chasing this elusive killer, and we're collecting clues. We try to understand. It's almost like having a serial killer, and you just don't know who he or she is, and you just, always on their trails. And what you try to do is you try to make the society safe, so that even if we don't know who this person is, at least we can protect the people so that we're not going to have any more serial deaths.
Until we can accurately predict where and when these killers will strike, we remain at the mercy of their power. Newcastle and Papua New Guinea are examples of the destruction which earthquakes bring in their wake. For the survivors, seeing their world ripped apart is something they find hard to come to terms with.
We had gone to work. We were doing our normal, everyday work things, and within split seconds, half the building was gone. And it's just amazing to think that, it can go from normal, everyday things to 30 seconds later, it's just all this devastation. It's just incredible.
It's like the old saying, don't say it could never happen to you, because it certainly can. And if that's an earthquake, and it's not a big earthquake on the grand scale of things, I just don't want to be around when there's another one.
All around the world, people continue with their daily routines, unaware that beneath their feet, the earth is moving, straining, shifting. In many earthquake zones around the world, people are now waiting for the next big one. Scientists say it could happen anytime. When it comes, lives will be changed forever.